Budget airlines Ryanair and EasyJet are calling for the EU to better protect airlines against disruption caused by French air traffic control strikes. They've already cost the airlines more than €100 million. Thousands of European flights were cancelled or delayed. The strikes that lasted 2 days are not new in France, so can the EU step in and save the airlines millions? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, over 1 million passengers were affected by French air traffic strikes in early July, and airlines warn of potential further summer chaos. 1 in 5 European flights normally route over France. Some budget airlines are demanding EU action to end the travel disruption. So, will the EU put a stop to this summer travel mayhem?
Chaos across European skies after hundreds of flights were cancelled, delayed or rerouted due to French air traffic control strikes in early July. A disruption that's become an annual issue.
Siamo ostaggi di Parigi.
We are hostages of Paris. We had to go home and get the first available flight. We're in a panic and we don't know what to do.
We don't really know if we can have any reimbursement on the flight, on the hotel and everything. So we're just staying there and just living with the moment and just the frustration.
During the 2-day strike, daily flight cancellations out of France increased by 59%. Almost 40% of flights departing France were delayed. Approximately 200,000 passengers were unable to fly. About a third of all daily European flights cross, land or take off in French airspace. The air traffic controllers' walkout was driven by a number of workplace grievances, such as chronic understaffing and unreliable equipment. Budget airlines Ryanair and EasyJet lost millions due to the disruption and are demanding action from the EU to stop future strikes.
We continue to call on Ursula von der Leyen. Why are you not protecting these overflights? Why is the single market for air travel being disrupted by a tiny number of French air traffic controllers, and all we get is a shrug of their shoulders and nothing we can do?
The EU responded by emphasising that air traffic control and strike regulation are governed by EU states' labour laws, and so Brussels cannot stop or prevent national strikes. The Eurocontrol Flight Agency estimates the air traffic controllers' strike cost the European aviation industry €120 million. Will France's air traffic control strike action ever be resolved, or is it set to remain a yearly crisis for both airlines and passengers?
Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say here with me in the studio we have Sally Gethin. She's an aviation analyst based in London. Ben Sehovic is a senior leader in aviation. He's founder and CEO of Opfyx. That's an operational software provider for the airline industry, dedicated to designing software to help the industry recover from exactly these type of scenarios. And in Cluny, in Burgundy, in France, we have Andrew Charlton. He's managing director at Aviation Advocacy. That's an independent air transport focused strategic consultancy. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Ben, to you first. You can always tell it's summer because French air traffic controllers are on strike. How frustrating is this?
It's incredibly frustrating, and the impact is felt way beyond just France. It's worth remembering that at least 1 in 3 flights in Europe touch France, whether that's departing, arriving, or flying over France. So when they go on strike, the minimum service has a huge impact. Most airlines will have to reroute a vast number of their flights to avoid French air traffic control. For example, Geneva, that is a destination where suddenly flights from whether it's London or anywhere in Spain will have to create these incredibly circuitous routes, doglegging to get into somewhere like Geneva. So that will add tens of minutes to a flight. Recently, over the 3rd and 4th of July, the most recent strikes, there were 6 million more kilometres flown by airliners simply because of the additional route they had to do in order to arrive to their destinations. On top of that, a huge number of flights get cancelled because there simply isn't enough capacity when France can't handle all of the volumes. And so the disruption that happens for customers and for passengers, especially at a peak summer season, is astronomical. Firstly, just cancelling a flight. Airlines have to put customers up in hotels. They've got to try and reaccommodate them. And that means trying to take the scarce availability that's left and get them to their destination and their hard-earned holidays as soon as possible. So it's incredibly frustrating, not just for the airlines, but also for the consumers and really, quite frankly, the entire European public.
Thanks, Ben. Andrew, to you, airline bosses, doing their utmost to keep planes flying, to keep people moving, everyone looking forward to their holidays. We're just hearing from Ben there, the level of frustration at the highest levels in the industry. But this keeps happening. Everyone keeps saying, why now? Why again? And the French unions, they time this for maximum impact.
Well, I think there's a couple of things to say to that. First of all, I think we all have to acknowledge that in Europe, the right to strike is a fundamental right, a fundamental human right, and we can't suggest that that controllers aren't entitled to strike. That's the first thing to note. The second thing to note is that there's no point, if you're a teacher, there's no point going on strike during school holidays. You only go on strike when you can cause maximum damage and maximum impact. I come from Australia. Let me assure you, 2 weeks before Christmas, the drivers of the trucks that deliver beer go on strike because that's their moment of maximum opportunity. And this is no more or less than that. The more important issue, though, is that actually under European law, there is a requirement, as Ben mentioned, to provide minimum service. But unfortunately, that is interpreted in each of the European member states differently. And in France, that minimum service is to provide service within France. In other countries, including Italy, including Greece, these are not countries famous for their calm industrial environments. The service must be to provide overflight services. And I think that's fair. I completely agree with that. And I accept, and France is completely in the wrong, frankly, in this, because if the strike is a strike by French air traffic controllers against the French employer, their employer, which is DSNA, then that's a domestic French issue and that should be impacting domestic France. It's got nothing to do with what's going on in Switzerland. It's got nothing to do with what's going on in Sweden, or indeed insert, extremely remote European country name here. It's the issue is that the way in which the French have enacted the European obligation to provide continued minimum service has been done in a way that benefits France rather than Europe as a whole. Now, what a shock. But that's the way it is. And yes, it's completely annoying. It's completely frustrating. I live in Geneva, as a matter of fact, so it's incredibly frustrating. I had my daughter flew to Nice in the middle of the strike, and she indeed was in the only aeroplane that got away from Gatwick to Nice that day. But she was going to a hen do of some description, and the bride-to-be, her flight was cancelled. So, she and 3 or 4 of her friends had a very fun weekend in Nice without the bride of honour. So,
extraordinary.
Of course, it's annoying.
Thank you, Andrew.
I guess sod's law.
Thanks, Andrew. Sally, to you, we're just hearing there an anecdote about the impact on people, whether it's holidays, business, leisure, people getting away. I mean, millions of customers have been impacted by this already across Europe.
Absolutely. And of course, they don't always know what their rights are. They think perhaps they can claim compensation. But because this is beyond the airline's control, so they have an agreement with their airline, that's where they book the ticket. But the airline is dealing with this as an issue beyond their control. They can't claim compensation. But what they can claim and what they should expect is to be looked after by their airline in the basic level of amenities, so food and drink, while they're waiting, while they're delayed on the ground, sometimes accommodation locally if necessary, and also they're allowed to reroute or ask for a refund, but additional compensation, no.
I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear that you can't claim compensation if air traffic control in France have ruined your holiday?
Well, again, as I say, that's an entity that's considered to be beyond the airline's control, the same as a weather situation would be, or any other external factor. But as Ben was saying, there's a big ask on airlines, and this really hits their pockets. Airlines as a whole aren't really happy with the way the refund consumer rights rules work anyway, and they're trying to get that altered. But when you have such a huge impact like this, yeah, it really hits their profits.
On that point, Ben, to you, I see EasyJet have already revealed 17 million euros in losses, and the industry across Europe 120 million euros. Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary, he is extremely angry about this. I mean, aviation coming back from the pandemic, just trying to get profitable again. You can really understand why the airlines are so cross.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Having survived the biggest aviation crisis through COVID, and now to have recovered, to constantly be hit with these types of costs is incredibly unreasonable and incredibly unfair. Sally's absolutely right. The airlines will do everything they can to look after the customers, but paying compensation out and some of the regulation that exists is also not fit for purpose. You can't have fares that are 40 euros and compensation that ends up being 250 euros if you're late for the flight. And you also can't expect airlines to keep footing the bill every single time for hotels and reaccommodation, which they will do, without passing ultimately those costs back to the consumer, because the airline is already an incredibly tight margin business. So all of these additional costs that are driven through strike action or through other ones, and I do agree with Andrew, of course, we do live in a society where the right to strike is there, but this is insanely maximum pain. It's pain during the summer holidays for hard-earning families. It's not quite the same, I would say, as a school, because there's plenty of peak business travel areas as well. And again, in the same way that other countries have given overflight rights and protected as minimum service those overflight rights, that is something France should be doing as well, because it's not just about the pain on the airlines. Ultimately, it is the pain on the consumers at an incredibly sensitive time, which is the peak summer holidays for families.
Thanks, Ben. Andrew, let's talk about some of the issues then. The French unions say they're understaffed, the equipment they have is outdated, they're talking about what they call toxic management practices. Is there much sympathy across France? We know the French love a strike.
The French will never knowingly walk past a barricade. Terrible stereotype there, sorry about that. Some of what the staff are arguing about may be relevant. The truth is air traffic control generally operates with incredibly outdated technology. We still use VHF radio, we still use radar. It's just remarkable the stuff that we don't use to manage these aeroplanes. The toxic management culture, I think, is actually something of a red herring. Because in fact, the French DSNA, the French controlling company, its method of updating this is to update the technology and then slowly retire the staff outwards. And the staff would rather be trained on the new equipment, but frankly, they're trying to use this as a means to push them out. Just to pick up on one of the things that Sally said, the other thing she's absolutely right. Normally, if there's circumstances where you're delayed, you're entitled to compensation, and you would have thought in this situation that the airlines were entitled to sue the Air Traffic Control Agency for the damages that they incur. But air traffic control agencies are government-owned, they're state entities, and they have, in effect, this is the wrong term, but in effect, sovereign immunity. They are exempt from being sued for the damages they cause by the airlines as part of their operational licence. So we're in this terrible bind where, to come back to Ben's point, the French have skewed the rules so as to deliberately benefit France at the expense of everyone else in Europe.
Thanks, Andrew. Sally, I noticed that some of the airlines are now calling for the European Union to act, for Ursula von der Leyen to get involved, intervene, and just make it so that they can't go on strike. But as we've been hearing from Andrew and Ben, the right to strike is pretty much enshrined in French legislation, isn't it? So what can the European Union really do to stop this?
Well, I'm no politician, but I think it's highly unlikely that the European Union will really bend to the wishes of the airline community. There's already a lot of regulation that airlines deal with from the EU to stop them being subsidised, for example, a lot of issues around there to protect free competition. So I can't see this one flying, excuse the pun. I think really the bigger issue is getting this new piece of law and infrastructure in place called the Single European Sky. I mean, that would really change everything. That's about redesigning the airspace. And at the moment, it's so limited, the way the airspace works. And it's impacted by geopolitical issues like the war in Ukraine or any other issue like that. So it's so difficult for airlines to navigate all that, for air traffic to navigate all those narrow corridors. With the Single European Sky, that will all change. But there's been so much lobbying to have that come in, and the European Union has put up so much red tape. It's all mired in loads of bureaucracy, and even that hasn't got through. It's been talked about for years. So I can't see how things are going to change in the short term either with the industrial action and preventing that.
So who's blocking this, just to be clear?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to step in here. The European Commission has worked day and night as she tried to shift heaven and earth to bring the Single European Sky in. The airlines themselves acknowledge that the fault is not the European Commission. I know in Britain it's a national hobby to kick the European Union, but it is not the European Union's fault. It is the national governments of Europe's fault. And that's frankly as much the British government.
Andrew, be specific. Well, who's blocking this?
All right. Practically every national government, certainly the French, certainly the Germans, to some extent the Italians, the British, the Greeks. There's a very large number of European states that don't want to make the change that is a Single European Sky simply because it will impact their ability to keep control of what's going on in their airspace. So it's absolutely wrong to blame Mrs van der Leyen. And another point, about 18 months ago, Michael O'Leary produced a petition which requires Mrs van der Leyen to act. And in the end, the European Commission had to say, we would love to help you. There's nothing we can do to stop the French.
Ben, I could see you nodding in agreement there. Just your thoughts on what's been said about that.
Yeah, firstly, I say yes, the Single European Skies would be a huge benefit to all of Europe. But Andrew's absolutely right. This has been talked about for decades. And ultimately, Eurocontrol, which is a European body, does a fantastic job of trying to coordinate all of the individual airspace and aeronautical providers across Europe. The way it works today is, in essence, that each sovereign state controls its own airspace and provides air traffic control services to each of its own airspaces. And Eurocontrol tries and coordinates them today. What the Single European Skies tries to do is create a single air traffic control region, basically over all of Europe, which would facilitate far better, far more efficient, and far more carbon-friendly routes in and out and through Europe. Each individual sovereign state does not want to cede control. And quite frankly, I would even say that the French air traffic controllers would go on strike if this was to progress within France, simply because they would lose control of being able to, quite frankly, hold holidaymakers across all of Europe, in essence, almost at ransom, because they themselves would lose control over the ability to close 1/3 of the flights through Europe that touch France. And if you had a Single European Skies, it would solve this problem. But I do agree with Andrew, this is not really a European Commission or EU fault. Individual states do not want to cede control to a central body, despite the huge benefits this would deliver.
Thanks, Ben. Sally, on the customer side of things, people have worked hard all year. They may have small children with them. You get to the airport, the excitement, and then it flashes up on the board that flight delayed, flight cancelled because of French air traffic control. I mean, the volume of people from the UK who go to Spain, for example, all of those flights go over France, clearly.
Yes, well, as Ben said, 1 in 3 flights have some contact with French air traffic control or not when they're on strike. So, yeah, of course, it has a massive impact. Also, all the different air navigation service providers, so it is country by country, the different area control centres are making efforts to improve their performance. But when they do, then that shines more scrutiny, a spotlight on the nations that are not improving, such as France. So there becomes more of a disparity in that sense as well. So there is incremental improvements given this logjam with not getting the single European sky, which I still maintain is still blocked in the red tape side, whether it's within individual states or the EU, it's still not able to come to fruition. So all that can happen is more efficiency changes and operational changes country by country. I mean, in the UK, for example, National Air Traffic Services has really addressed this and has put a lot of effort into it and managed to really improve the situation as well.
Thanks, Sally. Andrew, what would you like to see happen so that we're not back here in 12 months' time talking about strikes in French air traffic control?
Well, I think it's very clear what we need to do is, what France needs to do is bring its law into line with the rest of Europe and to facilitate overflights rather than flights within domestic France as the sort of reserve service that must always be provided as a bare minimum in a situation like this. The second thing is we absolutely need to keep pushing forward with the single European sky. And then the other thing, just to make a point, an air traffic controller takes about 3 years and €250,000 to train. So there's no overnight solution. What I'd like to see happen is more controllers, better equipment, new, more advanced equipment, and a more sensible approach.
Thanks, Andrew. Ben, any solutions from you? And I mean, just on that point about how long it takes to coach and train an air traffic controller, these are still well-paid guys and girls.
Look, firstly, I have to say that what air traffic controllers do is an incredibly important and absolutely safety critical job, and they do a fantastic job all over the world. So, you know, the entire flying public is really owes a huge debt of gratitude for the work that they do. So we have to acknowledge that. It does take an incredibly long time to train air traffic controllers, and rightly so, because it is a very, very skilled position. Yes, there is a vast amount of outdated technology that they're using today, but it is not a quick fix to simply modernize that technology. You know, the aircraft that are flying over our airspace will vary from a brand new modern Airbus 321neo to an A320 that might be 25 years old. They'll have different equipment on board. How we modernize the air traffic control space in a real-time operation has to go hand in glove with how also the airlines and the rest of the airspace is also being modernized. We're seeing, you know, new types of airborne sort of single unmanned vehicles flying. We've got drones flying now in our airspace. This is all the things that air traffic controllers have to start to contend with. So this won't be fixed in a year. I think the way to try and prevent this, as Andrew has said, is for France to really look at those overflight permissions to actually say, look, yes, of course, the right to strike is enshrined and we should protect that. But we should make sure that we are not having such a disproportionate impact on all of Europe. You know, just another stat to tell you that on the 3rd and 4th of July, 1 in 20 flights in Europe, not France, but in Europe, were cancelled because of the French ADC strikes. So it is just a ripple effect, frankly, a tidal wave that goes way beyond just France. And I think looking to protect the fact that so many flights fly over France and protecting those so that, yes, we balance the right to strike with the size of the economic, the human and environmental impact of those decisions.
Thanks, Ben. That's very well explained. Sally, to you, one of the strongest voices on this is Michael O'Leary of Ryanair. I mean, he's apoplectic about this. Do you think he's right to be so very angry?
Well, he's very vocal, and he's got a right to be vocal because of the enormous hit that airlines take, and it's very frustrating because they can't seem to push through this new technology, and it is beyond their control. EasyJet, other airlines have also been very vocal on this as well, and also that garners more attention, obviously, to the point as well.
I think a guy as powerful, as successful as O'Leary, when this is an annual problem, it must be immensely frustrating that he can't get any influence in Europe to make it stop?
Well, it's like Groundhog Day. We were pretty much in the same setting last year. There were other issues which were impacting as well. There'd been the global IT outage, for example, but it was a very similar situation, and it was the same sort of reactions you were getting from airlines. So it must be very frustrating for them. And obviously, traffic is rebounding now, going beyond what the levels were in 2019. And there are concerns that this keeps on happening. It's very repetitive.
Ben Sehovic in London, thank you. Andrew Charlton in Burgundy, France, and Sally Gethin here in the studio with me. Thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.